I was president back in 82, 83, and we were struggling. It was a tough time. It was in a recession, and we lost money in that conference that I was actually the president of, and I didn't feel great about that. But I spent the next few years again trying to help remedy that and grow the association. But it's come so far, and I'm really pleased to see that. It's fantastic.
Well, it's funny because I had been on the board for probably 4 years before I became president, and we were struggling. We were struggling in relationship to weren't making money at the conferences. We were still trying to identify who we were and who were the environmental professionals in relationship to that. Most of us had a career in something else. And so it was really, and I ended up being president for 2 years. In the original groups were always 1 year. So from, I believe it was 84 to 86. And it was really, how do we revamp conferences to basically make better attendance? How do we really start budgeting? We also had an advisor company that was really giving us, I think, steering us in the wrong direction. So we got rid of them and went more to a volunteer program. So my tenure was all about how to straighten the ship, if you will, from a business standpoint. I'd been running my own company at that time, probably for 5 or 6 years. And I had learned the hard way in running my own business. And so that's how we looked at it.
We started my first term started in 1987. We were still composed of a full state board that did a lot of the activities at the state level, and the chapters were fairly autonomous at that time. There wasn't too much of an identity of chapters versus the state, et cetera. Another kind of unsung hero to the association during my term of office and before that was a certain fellow named Dwight Steinert. He was way ahead of his time. Well before the internet was certainly known and just starting to kind of proliferate. Dwight had this vision of connecting the local chapters with the state board and local issues with state issues through what we now regularly take for granted as the internet.
Involved in the AEP as an organization since the 91. And for a number of years, I was a director at large, and then gravitated to and was elected as the executive vice president, and that was in 2007. And in 2009, was elected as president and served the organization for 3 terms, 6 years, and stepped down, and the executive vice president was elected president. So my involvement was over 20 years of being involved one way or another. Initially, it was attending the CEPA training that was offered by AEP, and then evolved into more roles of responsibility and more work with AEP. I guess the rubber hit the road when I was executive vice president. There were 2 big things that were facing the organization. One was a horrible situation in the finances that due to the downturn in the economy and a whole bunch of other things, and also mismanagement at the time by the manager for AEP, the immediate problem in front of us was to square away the finances, get it organized, and start making money, which we did a couple of ways. One is we raised dues. 2, we received income from the conferences each year and from the special events and special training. And over time, we built back the finances. And this lapsed into the time when I was president. We put together a formal organization of legislative reps, that being one representative from each of the chapters, and then 1 or 2 other people, and including at the time, the consultant that we had hired as AEP. But more significantly is we put together a draft of a platform for what AEP stood for, things that were good, things that were not good with regard to CEQA in general, but the environment in particular. And that has been refined a number of times since then. But was the second big hurdle to get through was formulating a platform that we could walk in to a legislator, hand them a platform and say, this is what we stand for. And then they had something they could work with, as opposed to, well, a nice little visit. Hi, hello, how are you? And be on our way.
I became president in January of 2019, and I did 2 terms through December 2022. So dealt with a lot of things, COVID-19 being one of them. You never know what's going to come up during your time on the board or as president. And so you adapt and you react to the issues of the day.
Was one of the original founders of the Association of Environmental Professionals, attended the Stanford University, actually the formation of the association with some really unique leaders in the early environmental planning practice. It wasn't even known at that time, except we were talking about it and it came together. And a couple of names were Al Reynolds from County of Santa Barbara. I mean, I would say he was really the guru and founder, if you will, brought us all together. And there's I think it was Paul Zygmunt from ESA was also a prominent leader at that time. So that was back in 1974, and I was just fairly early in the professional practice of environmental planning, because in this evolving field, which was evolving extremely quickly in the first couple of decades, in particular. I mean, it still is. It's never going to stop. You need to stay abreast of the issues. You need to stay abreast of the regulations, and a big part of that is being involved in the Association of Environmental Professionals, and because it brings so much opportunity for training, for mentorship, for leadership.
There was very few environmental management or environmental studies degrees at the time. And so looking at how we were going to involve those various groups was a key piece. Cal Poly, particularly in relationship, they had students at every conference and they were volunteering and they were just so excited. And that became one of the sources of where we all, the consulting firms and local government, got their early employees. I'd say my biggest accomplishment was balancing the budget. So I think that was probably the number one. Is when I left, basically we're down in the black. We actually had made money at the conferences and we were starting moving forward, I thought, on a steady platform. One of our biggest fights, though, was an issue where we tried to have a code of ethics. And we just could not get an agreement at the board on the code of ethics because the engineers felt that they didn't want to be too environmentally oriented. The biologists felt they needed to be more environmentally oriented. So getting something to balance was a struggle and didn't really come to fruition until much later, after my tenure as president.
During the early days of CEQA in the 70s and 80s, UC Extension, particularly out of the Davis office, had a very strong workshop program. And a number of the law firms would have legislative updates and CEQA implementation workshops. And using that as a model, we developed our own series of workshops. That's where the CEQA workshops came from. It solved many problems and many issues, certainly financial. It became a revenue source other than dues. It also strengthened the communication between the state and local chapters. Chapters could bring in, and still do bring in, local issues in their own geography. And then the workshops were also an opportunity for us to go from the top down to say, here are the bills and recent court cases that are happening in the state. So it was a quite successful program. But I just want to emphasize how difficult that was to start. Number one,
it off. And then in March of 2020, COVID-19 happens. And so we immediately had to pivot all of our activities and programs to online and virtual programs. And I couldn't be more proud of my board during that time. It was very challenging times, but we adapted and we were still able to provide great programs to our members, and we remained very, very successful during the pandemic. But that year, 2020, in addition to the pandemic, there was a great deal of social and political unrest. There was the tragic death of George Floyd, and I felt like, well, what could we do? Knowing that we're an environmental organization, I met with our executive committee, and we all felt like we needed to at least state something for our members, and so we issued a joint statement on the tragic events surrounding George Floyd, and we described some of the steps that we were taking as the AEP board to address some of these broader issues. And
I think it was in the 80, whether it was the 84 conference or the 85 conference, became very successful. It was one in Sacramento. One of the tools that we had is, let's have the conferences near airports, big cities where you could fly in. Let's find cost effective. And I believe that conference was maybe in West Sacramento, where we found an old complex that was more affordable in relationship to it. But we also set up a tour of the Capitol and the legislature, which so much of what we were doing was dependent upon what the legislature was doing.
And it turned out we had some very good rapport, particularly with the state staff, to the legislature. As you AP members are probably aware, most of the legislators don't write their own bills. They're written by the staff. And the staff would reach out to us for my boss, a given legislator, would say, we need to sponsor a certain bill. How will that work at the local level? And we were often asked for our advice of how would we implement the bill as it's being thought about and debated within the legislature.
The development of the AEP Institute, that started under my watch, if you may. That the AEP Institute was essentially a single subject with a number of sessions related to that subject. And it would be subjects like firefighting in an urban area, water in general, air quality control issues. They were topics of interest at that point in time that led to a one-day seminar that was offered, not by each chapter, but by an individual, by AEP in specific legislative items. Having representation on the legislative committee, they were able to bring forward from the chapter various ideas that were then incorporated into the legislative platform. And we were able to take that forward so that more people had more of a voice in legislative matters. I think they appreciated very much having a platform to work from, because they knew where we stood, where we came from, the kinds of things we would support, the kinds of things we would not support. There's always someone making a run at CEQA. CEQA is no good. We've got to get rid of it. Well, there's a big defense in keeping CEQA, that it involves a process of taking a project, be it large, small, indifferent. There are different levels of where environmental documents are prepared. But being involved from not only the chapter level, but at the organization level, of being able to present that to a legislator in simple terms that they understood, has helped us greatly and has influenced various pieces of legislation that we probably weren't able to do as well before than we did later.
And updating our code of ethics so that people know where we stand as an organization, and also as a member of our organization, what's expected, what types of behavior are expected from our membership. And then it's still ongoing and developing, but the diversity, equity, and inclusion program that was adopted during my presidency, and I'm very, very proud of that.
To 4 or 5 people that I could actually bounce ideas off and debate and encourage and argue with in a productive manner. That group of people changed over time, but I would say that biggest memory, network is an often overused and misunderstood term, but I mean somebody that could actually sit down heart to heart and say, this bill won't work, or it may work in San Francisco, but won't work quite the same way in Chico or San Diego or Bakersfield, et cetera. So the ability to liaison and establish working relationships with people all around the state.
I remember one conference that we went to in Palm Springs where we decided to have a big party at a park and then didn't realize that you couldn't have alcohol at the park. So I sort of snuck out and just bought a whole series of cases of alcohol to bring in to make sure that people could enjoy a little libation. But things like that is that making sure that the conferences were also fun. Oh, well, I think that one is a CLMR. And I'm not sure if I was president yet, and it may have been right before I became president. And sitting around, a lot of us, and we weren't that old at the time. I was in my early 30s. After basically the conference over, you go out and there, sitting around the campfire and singing, and really reaching out to the local governments, particularly, and also the consulting firms on what is the most important court cases coming down, how we can integrate it into it. So trying to improve the way we were doing the profession.
Yeah, absolutely. Being a member of the AEP jam band, Planet Rock, I've created lifelong friendships with the members of that band, Scott Morgan and Chris Stabenfeld and Bill Prince, and the Wolfman, David Wolf. That's one of the highlights of every conference is the AEP Jam Band getting together. I think I would just like to thank Gary Jacobs for getting me involved in AEP back when I began my career. The Orange County chapter was looking for a newsletter editor, and Gary called me up, and that was my first exposure to AEP and being an active member. And now I've held various roles both at the chapter level and at the state level, and I've just had an amazing experience, and I've met just incredible people and have made incredible friendships with so many AEP members, and I really appreciate everything that AEP has given me and the profession has given me.
Jose Bodipo member. Jose is a guy who came to me through my wife, and he was going to become a principal. He was working at her school in relationship to that and was going to grad school. And ultimately, my wife said, I got this young guy here, and you really got to meet him. I think he would be perfect. Now, granted, I also love basketball, and Jose's a basketball player, so there's that aspect. But I can still remember meeting him for the first time, and I actually had just won a big contract with the San Diego Unified School District. And I was working in Southeast San Diego, which was the largest African-American community, more diverse than that. And I said, you don't need Brian Mooney down there talking to people in the African-American community. You need another African-American. And I think that when we're going into communities, and whether it's an Asian community, or let's say it's Vietnamese, Laotian, the African-American community, you want people to go in and discuss environmental issues and discuss planning issues that look like those people. And I think, to me, it's just extremely important that we show that diversity. I think the other one is that they're going to look at the world a little differently, and we want to understand and appreciate how they look at it.
The size and diversity of the organization and the stability and the economics stability at this point in time is it's just going to grow exponentially. I mean, it's just well established. And, I was president back in 82, 83, and we were struggling. It was a tough time. It was in a recession, and we lost money in that conference that I was actually the president of, and I didn't feel great about that. But I spent the next few years again trying to help remedy that and grow the association. But it's come so far, and I'm really pleased to see that. It's fantastic.
And we really couldn't have done it. We can't do it without. We're all volunteers, so we can't do it without the continued dedication and passion of. Basically the people that you mentored and the example that you and everybody who was at the foundation of AEP, your legacy still lives on. I guess maybe I just want to acknowledge and thank that, because just Gary still helps prepare all of our case updates every single year. So
it's fantastic.
This still is an ongoing gift that you all started when you helped found AEP at sort of the birth of environmental planning in California and in the United States.
Yeah.
Another person and I started a training program of CEQA basics for the legislators, and specifically for the legislative staff, that they would be, each legislator has, anywhere between 3 or 5 up to 7 or 8 people on their staff that help them sort out, where do we go with legislative matters and da. And what we found is in giving that session, it's been very, very crowded with people that are legislative, that they don't come from an environmental background. They don't come from, a planning background. They're just citizens off the street that suddenly they are now relied on to come up with information. So how do they get that information? That information comes from us as an organization. So we give an annual CEQA basics class for legislative staff. And if the legislator himself wants to be there, that's fine. But usually it's a staff person.
By providing online programs, virtual programs, we were able to reach out to a lot more people. And it made it a lot more convenient for people to attend. For instance, the AEP Institute last year was virtual, and it will be virtual again this year. It allowed for greater attendance, but then also better attendance for speakers, higher profile speakers that might not be able to fly somewhere to attend in person, but getting assembly members, members of the state government, people kind of leading voices in climate change and environmental programs. So that is one benefit that's come out of COVID. And now, although we still provide great in-person programs, we also have a number of virtual programs that have been very successful.
I think participating in the nonprofit organizations, an AEP is one, try to move into a leadership role, become active in relationships. However, there's other organizations here in San Diego. A good friend of mine, Mike Page, who started his career at Mooney and Associates, ultimately is very active in I Love It Clean San Diego. So things like that, getting involved. I can still remember one of the driving factors that got me into the business and caring about environmental planning and ultimately city planning too was the oil spills in Santa Barbara in 1970. And I was a surfer. And so ultimately that in tune with nature and, hey, I've got to help clean this up. I've got to find ways to stop these kinds of environmental disasters. The Love Canal fire. All of those things in relationship to it. So I think for the young people, get involved, and have passion about what you're doing.
So my advice to either young professionals or people starting out in the professional field would be always be expanding your field. Always want to learn What's the next issue on the horizon? And how can it be implemented at the local level?
Now, I've noticed over time that there's been a much greater involvement of the student chapter at many universities of AEP, some vary in size from a handful up to 30, 40, 50, maybe even more. And that's a good place to get your start, is be involved in a student chapter, which leads you in time. When you graduate, you're then a young professional. And we have our membership is set up for students, for young professionals, and then the professional. So we as an organization recognize that when you're fresh out of or in college, you probably can't afford a whole lot. And then when you get out of college, you can afford even less because maybe you don't have a student loan that you're working off of. Anyway, but the professional learning doesn't stop in school. It continues on, and take advantage of that continuation.
I think for young professionals, really take advantage of the AEP programs, attending the CEQA workshops, the CEQA basics, the AEP mentor-mentee program, seek out a mentor, because it is a complicated field, and it's growing more litigious every year. So, reach out to longtime AEP members that have been doing this a long time, and just try to learn all you can from us.
So in 50 years, I'm hoping we learn to, one, adapt to that environmental change, climate change. Two, we learn that we have to work together in some form of governance, and whether it's nationally or whether it's internationally, in some sort of programs that cooperate and can deal with the changes in demographics and the changes in migration. I don't know how long I'll be around, but I have grandkids, and so it's very important for me. And with my grandkids, I hope they are part of the solution in one form or another. Otherwise, one is an entertainer, so that's another form of solution in relationship to that. But yeah, I think 50 years is going to be a very different world, and how we adapt to that world is going to be critical. And I think the environmental profession have to be part of the groups, and I'd say the same with the planners, in relation to help us adapt.
But in the early days of some of the earliest environmental proposals for climate change, they thought about a threshold year of 2050. And my background is in planning. My profession is always in planning, but it's always been, at most, when you're doing a general plan, for example, 20 years. And if you're dealing with the political climate, 4 years, the term of office of a council member, et cetera. All of which is well and good, certainly, but I like the idea of considering what will happen to a population 20, 30, 40, 50 years. Nobody can predict the environment, physical or socioeconomic environment at that time. So you need some flexibility and adaptability of any policies that we develop. But I think thinking beyond a 4-year political term of office or a 20-year life of a general plan, that's what I would advocate or recommend that environmental planners, think about as part of this. Even though your day-to-day work, your Monday work, as we were talking before, might be filling out initial studies or managing environmental impact reports, think about beyond CEQA, beyond the Clean Water Act or various state or even federal regulations, and think about in the broadest possible terms what we consider to be the environment. So from my perspective, I'm very excited, very optimistic about the future from what I see. And I've just seen AEP evolve from a very small group of people at an unknown field at that time that was cobbling together various disciplines and created their own profession that is respected at local government level and certainly at the state level. And AEP has been a very strong influence in bringing those perspectives out.
50 years ago, it didn't exist. And now here we are. 50 years later, and we go, oh my gosh, so much has changed. Well, what's going to happen in 50 years? That is hard to answer. But I think continuing education, continuing professional development is vitally important. So I think that there's going to be more legislation as time goes by. So each legislator has to go forth with something. So legislation is going to change, and staying current with that is appropriate.
I would like to see the fruits of the DEI program. I would like to come back in 50 years and see a more diverse membership within the organization, as well as the profession in general.
There's no better place to get environmental information than AEP. And that's the song we sing, the tune we play is come to us. We're here. We represent a resource, a valuable resource in overall planning and project execution.